Okay, this is the final chance to make something work. I don't quite get. Oh, Max Sundance won. Thank you for sticking around. I appreciate your patience. I don't understand why your phone works but then the PC didn't. But anyway, so what did you miss? How much did you get before we lost it again? Let me just go back a little bit because I've had lots of practice today about backtracking. Okay, so just go under here. Right, so I was saying I've got to put this in a nutshell now because I've been saying it for like half an hour. Okay, so you didn't miss anything? Oh, that sounds nice. Okay, intervals. I was talking about intervals. I was talking about every one of the intervals has a feeling when you play it against the root, and you can use and exploit that feeling of each of the intervals in your solo playing. So we went through each of them. Intervals of the major scale we went through. We went through 1 to 7, and we kind of listened to how that felt. So the root against the root was obviously pretty flat in terms of emotional value. Okay, root against the second, you can feel and hear that second doesn't feel at rest. There's two types of intervals really. The stable ones and the ones that are active, the ones that feel like they need to move from where they are to somewhere else. And the second is one of those. You can totally hear it. So the second, it can go in either direction. It either wants to move from the second back down to the 1, or it wants to go from the second up to the 3. Okay, because it feels better when we get to the 1 or the 3. The 2, as you can hear, really wants to move on. So the 2 is one of those active ones that need to move up or down. And that's really the only interval that wants to go either direction. Okay, next we have the 3. And as we've already experienced, the 3 is a solid one. Sorry about the snare rattle there. I might have to take that up for next time. But 3 is solid, stable, doesn't feel like it needs to move anywhere else. Now let's listen to the 4. 4 feels like it wants to pull back down to the 3. So the 4 is one of the active ones, and it likes to pull, feels like it needs to pull back down to the 3. That's why we have sus4 chords, because you've got that 4. And then you resolve to, this is a D sus4, and then there's a D. Then there's a C sus4, and resolves to the C. That's what's happening with that particular interval. So that's the 4. The 5. The 5 is solid as. It's, it's the dependable rock friend, dependable friend who's your rock, I meant to say. There's no budging that one. It's a super solid one. Okay, moving on to the 6. The 6 really wants to pull back down to the 5. Okay, the 7 wants to go up to the 8, which is also, the 1. So those are the intervals. There's 2 piles. There's the solid, stable ones, and there's the active ones. The active ones feel like they need to move to somewhere else to resolve. And the stable ones are the ones that feel already at rest. Okay, so what you can do with that information is exploit that in your phrasing. If you've got a musical phrase that you would normally play, like in the blues or something, quite often you might return to the root note. But what you can do is end your phrase on one of these active intervals to feel for the audience that there's something else to say, because it's naturally an unresolved one. Okay, it's an unresolved interval. That means that people naturally want it to resolve at some point, and so you set the expectation that, well, you need to play something else. There's something else to come for you to facilitate that resolution. Okay, so that was intervals. Starting with a musical idea was the first thing. Knowledge of intervals. And let's look at just creating something and then creating other things from it, because a lot of people, when they play, even when they play in the pentatonic boxes, they are playing all over the place because they feel they need to move around the fretboard for it to be a good solo or whatever. But actually, most of the time, the best solos don't really tend to move around a whole lot between phrases. There might be kind of a chapter here, if you think about it like a book, and then another new chapter here, and then a final chapter maybe up here. But it's not like there's like chapter 1's here, chapter 2's up here, chapter 3's back down there. There's not a lot of variance, because all we're trying to do, and I think this is just my opinion, but as instrumentalists, whether you play the trumpet or the sax or the piano or the guitar, we're all trying to emulate the emotion and texture and phrasing of the human voice. It's the thing that we connect with most. You can have a band that's just got a guitar and a voice. You don't need guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, because the voice is the most important thing. That's what we connect to. But if you've got a band with like bass, drums, guitar, keyboards, but no singer, it's less successful, unless you've got one of the instrumentalists who takes the role of the singer, like Satriani. His guitar is basically vocal lines. That's how he creates. So we need to really understand that what we're trying to do is tell a story. And the way we tell a story is to start with an opening line, just like any story, and then we build upon that line. We fill in. We might start, if it was a story, you might start with, I don't know, she hung on as hard as she could, but she knew at some point she'd have to let go. And immediately, somebody who's read the first line of that book will go, wow, okay, what's happening here? I can't wait to hear what happens next. What's she hanging on to? What happens if she lets go? Who is she? Where is she? So if we translate that into phrasing, if we take a musical phrase and start at the start with creating it, even if we don't create the whole solo in our heads, because that's quite a challenge, but we need to start with something. If we start with a musical idea that we've heard in our inner ear, we find that on our fretboard, and then from there we can start to pull more out of that phrase and develop that phrase. And I think that's how the best storytelling, the best solos come about. Obviously, you can intersperse that with your favorite licks or a flashy technique that you want to include to prove to all the other guitarists how awesome you are. But really, we want to start with a phrase and then have some understanding of things we can do with that phrase beyond us creating the first one, because sometimes it's hard enough to create a good first one. All right, so I've got a backing track here in G minor, and I'm gonna play a little bit, and I'm gonna do exactly what I've suggested you do, which is start at the start and listen and create from here or from here. Let's just listen. Okay, so I'm going to stop that there, and try and pull something out of the air, pull something out of my musical ear. But while I was listening to that, the first thing I noticed was that everything is falling on the one. The other guitar, the instrumentation is all kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 3, 4, 1. So I'm going to purposely stay out of the way of that and start just somewhere after the one. Not quite sure what as yet, but let's try like yeah, okay, well let's just go with that. Okay, so there's my first phrase. It's okay, it will do. It's not mind-blowing, but that works all right. Now here is the important next step. Once you've created that, I mean, it might take you ages to come up with something that you really like, just a few notes. The next step is to take that as some kind of template and then change it slightly. Okay, so let's look at the second phrase. The second phrase, well, here's one of the things I could do would be to play exactly the same thing, but then change the last note to something else. So the first phrase would be, next time I could play, so that's immediately instant second phrase. Now what I've landed on there is the flat 7 in the chord, which is a little bit of tension, a little unresolved, a little bit of you know, what we talked about before in terms of quality of that interval. Now the first time I landed on the 5th of the G minor chord. So maybe I did it the wrong way around. You could look at that and go, well, I landed on a solid interval in the first phrase and I landed on a slightly unresolved one in the second phrase. Maybe I should swap those over and go. Actually, in this instance, I personally think that using my ears, that doesn't sound as good as the first way round we had it. So sometimes what we talk about working in theory on paper may not work as well in practice. So let's stick with that. Another thing we can do for the second phrase is look at the first phrase in terms of what's happening in it, in terms of analyzing the melody. Where is my hat? Papa, my hat is in the wardrobe. Or it's HAIT, so either that was hat or hair. because usually I do have a lot of hair. So it might be a hair question, Vapo. Are you asking about my hair? It's been cut, obviously. I had a big Hendrix show about 3 weeks ago, and I have to grow my hair long for that tribute show because I play the rather I play Jimmy, so it's a whole thing. It's not just get their play, but there's the afro, there's the big shave and the pencil moustache and the Hendrix hat and all of that. But once that's done, we don't have a show for a good couple of months now because it's winter here. You know, I like to take a break from Jimmy and have a normal head of hair for a while. And that makes my mum quite happy, I got to say. She's like, oh, look at your hair. When are you going to get that cut? All right, Rapo, thanks for your question. Back to this. So we were looking at the first phrase and what we can do to the first phrase to make the second phrase. And the second suggestion I was about to describe was looking at the melody and what happens in the first phrase. What happens in the first phrase, it starts on the starting note. The second note is higher. The third note is higher than the previous one. The fourth note is higher than all of them. And then it heads back down to a low note. So using that framework, that kind of, then we can create a second phrase using that, but different notes. So let's start here, and I could go up from here. Okay, so that's ascending, and then it landed on a low note. So if we put those two together, we get so you've got another option there. You've also got other options in terms of changing the rhythm if you wanted to keep the same notes. And just leave some of those out, or add something else on the end. So that's what we can do here. So back to, I mean, that's all to do with music, really, and understanding the intervals and letting a musical idea come from here before it comes from here. A lot of us pick up the guitar and just start playing our comfortable position. But if we sing it first, then it has to be musical. Excuse me. Okay. The way I found the pathway I took out of the pentatonic scales was pretty much via the modes. And I know that is scary because apparently modes are really scary things. But I was always intimidated by modes. I knew what the modes were and I knew the positions of the modes, and that information was available to me. But my problem was I didn't know how to apply that information to my playing, how to use it in a practical sense. So here's what I did, and I'm very grateful I got it this way because it was immediately easy for me to apply to my pentatonic playing. Okay, so here's what I did. Yep, you could go out. Once I could go out of the house because of the diminished scale. Oh, you couldn't go out of the house because of the diminished scale. I guess that's good because you were obsessed with the diminished scale and you kind of worked really hard, Vapo, in terms of focusing on it and getting it really under your fingers. The diminished scale is a good one. This is what I did. So what I came to understand, first of all, let me say I knew no way of practically applying the modes, although I knew where I was and what they were. So here's what I did. I separated them into major and minor modes. And I wish, it sounds obvious now, but I wish I'd done that. Because for me, modes were like 7 things I didn't know anything about. And that's quite, that's quite a lot of things. But by splitting them into major and minor modes, I immediately chopped them down to chopped kind of in half, right? And I was a minor pentatonic player. So then I began to look at the modes that were minor modes that were used in some of the songs and the artists I like to play and like to listen to. So Santana, Satriani, Clapton, Gary Moore, whoever your thing is, try and target a mode that you can use and play along to your favorite players. So I think the first mode I tackled was Aeolian mode. Now, I don't want to get bogged down in the names or anything, but the key thing for me was understanding that the modes are 7-note scales, the pentatonics are 5-note scales, and if you know the pentatonic shapes, you already know 5/7 of the modes, because the modes are really only those extra 2 notes. And so understanding where those other 2 notes were in relation to the pentatonics I've been playing for years was a really big deal for me. So for example, Aeolian has this note in here, and then we've got our normal pentatonic, then it's got this note, and then a pentatonic is normal. Okay, so there's a major second, and a minor third, which is in the pentatonic, perfect fourth, it's in the pentatonic, perfect fifth, it's already in the pentatonic, then this note, minor sixth, minor 7, and the octave. So that's the full thing. And it sounds like a lot more, but actually there's just those 2 notes here and here, just repeated, and here. So you've got the 2-octave pentatonic scale. So that meant, look, I knew the pentatonic. I could go. But I could also go. And I had those 2 other notes at my disposal, and I knew where to use them because I could just use them at the end of a phrase or in between 2 of my pentatonic notes. Yeah. And sometimes the easiest way to kind of evoke that feeling of the mode is just to hang on one of those notes. Vapo. Is there a system in how the extra notes change within the different modes? How the extra notes change within the different modes? There's not really a system. It's not a system as such, but there is a formula for each one of the modes. But like I said, if you just concentrate on one of the tonalities, the major or the minor, and then look at which 2 extra notes relate to those. So that was Aeolian. Aeolian's got a major second and a minor sixth. And Dorian has only one change to that. Okay, it's got a major second again, but it's got a major sixth. And an easy way to remember which one you can use where is if you've got like a minor chord or a minor 7 chord going to a major chord or a dominant chord, you use Dorian, or you can use Dorian. So minor chords to major or dominant chords use Dorian, and minor chords. Well, I shouldn't say minor chords. I should say this minor chord that's got a root on the 6th string, moving to a major chord which has its root on the 5th string. So let's say we're using A and D for an example. Okay, so if you've got that move from an A minor to a D major or a D7, you use Dorian. And the reason you use Dorian is because this ends up, if you know a bit of your chord theory, this ends up being a 2 chord and this ends up being a 5 chord. So your tonal center there is your 2 chord, and your 2 chord relates to the 2nd mode of the major scale. 2nd mode is Dorian, so that's how you know you can use Dorian. Now, if it was a minor chord with its root on the 6th string and another minor chord with its root on the 5th string, directly underneath the root, like i.e. on the same fret, so an A minor or an A minor 7 to a D minor or D minor 7, that's a different. That is when you use Aeolian, because this turns out to be, I can't remember, is it 6 to a 4? I can't remember. Yeah, it has to be a 6, because Aeolian's a 6th mode. 6 to a 4, so it's a 6 to a 4 move in terms of the chord. This is a 6 chord to a 4 chord, and so because it's a 6 chord, you use Aeolian. Okay, so that is that's some advice if you want to get into the modes, because you want to understand the additional tonal color you can bring to your pentatonic playing. You can check out some of my videos on YouTube. There's one about modes via pentatonics. You just look up 15-minute guitar. And there's another one about modes, the only 3 questions you need to know the answer to play modes. So I've kind of tried to make it as simple as possible. I'll probably explain it a bit better in those videos than I just did, because you've obviously got some questions there. But that would be my recommended way in. Is you know the pentatonics, and the modes are only 2 extra notes. So your learning really only involves understanding and remembering which 2 extra notes they are in which context. Okay, so you know 71% of the modes because you already know 5 out of the 7 notes included in the modes. The pentatonic shapes reside within those modal shapes. So you actually know far more than you think you do. So learning the other 2/7 or the other 29% shouldn't be too intimidating for you. Okay, Vapo, I hope that helps. Max Sundance 1, thank you. You've been a lifesaver today, helping me navigate these tech problems, particularly with regard to the audio. So I'm sorry about that for those who came and left, because there was just some guy randomly gesticulating and mouthing, but no sound was coming out. I'm going to wrap up now, but I'm going to do this probably next weekend as well, probably same time, and definitely with better audio and better testing. But thank you for joining me today, and I will see you next time, guys. Thank you very much, and well, probably see you next week. Take care for now. Bye.